Please be aware, in this podcast series we talk about all areas of safeguarding, which some people may find upsetting. So please make sure you're okay listening to today's topic. Be mindful of those around you, such as children, that you might not want to listen in. Hi, I'm SSS Safeguarding Director Sam Preston.
And I'm former head teacher and content author Sarah Spinks.
Welcome to today's Safeguarding Conversation podcast. Today we're discussing one of the biggest changes in education policy this year. That is the new Ofsted report card system. So from November 2025, the familiar headline judgments are being replaced with a 5-point scale supported by narrative content. And the big question is this genuine reform or just a rebrand?
Well, it's certainly got people talking, Sam. You know, on paper, this is Ofsted's attempt to respond to years of criticism, offering parents clearer information, giving schools more fairness and creating transparency. But as with so many reforms, as we know, it's not as simple as that.
Yeah. And history will tell us that it's not always, to be relied on, that, things will be simple and easy to understand. So let's start with the new 5-point scale. So we've got categories of urgent improvement, needs attention, expected standard, strong standard, and exceptional. So it's replacing the old wording. Personally, I think it's a step in the right direction. You know, the labels are clearer, I suppose, and I think will possibly be easier for parents to understand.
Yeah, and maybe the language feels more accessible. But the core issues remain. One grade can't capture the complexity of a whole school. So unless the narrative context is given proper weight, this risks becoming just a rebrand exercise.
Yeah, so we're really sort of thinking, aren't we, better words, but maybe not better substance.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Ofsted's also cutting the number of judgment areas from 8 to 6. So teaching gets incorporated into the curriculum, attendance into behaviour, but safeguarding still stands alone as met or not met.
Yeah, so streamline, it maybe reduce some duplication, but the big worry here is attendance. We're facing record levels of persistent absence nationally. And I think burying it inside behaviour could mean it doesn't get the prominence it deserves.
Yeah, and that's a real concern for me about this. Probably the boldest change is the addition of narrative context. So reports will now include commentary on strengths, weaknesses, pupil demographics, deprivation, and SEND. And in essence, I think that sounds really good.
Yeah, it does. For the first time, school stories can be told in context, which I think is really vital. As a former head, I always felt that was really missing. But let's be honest, most people only look at the headline grade. Yeah. And if the media still runs with a single word label, parents, they may miss that nuance entirely.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, Sarah. Now, Ofsted are also introducing a colour coding system. And having looked at this, I'm not convinced it was entirely necessary. And I actually think it might even make things more confusing for parents.
Yeah, exactly. The clarity, clarity is only clarity, isn't it? If people actually read it.
And understand it. Yeah. And also, I think there's something about a colour coding system that sends an absolute message. There isn't the ability to build that contextual into it because you're just looking at very fixed, in relation to whatever colour. I think that's going to be really, really quite complicated.
Yeah.
However, that leads us to another reform. So Ofsted will publish toolkits, so schools know exactly what inspectors are looking for, and that should help to reduce any uncertainty.
Yeah, but it could also create rigid checklists.
Yeah.
Schools might end up teaching to the toolkit, instead of focusing on what their pupils sort of genuinely need.
Or focusing on delivering the toolkit content rather than, say, for instance, in safeguarding, rather than contextual safeguarding needs bespoke to each individual setting. I think there's a danger it's going to divert attention.
Yeah, I think there is a danger. And I think governors are worried too. If external judgments don't align with internal governance, schools could be pulled in two directions.
Yeah, I agree. So let's talk about that shiny top label, exceptional. Inspectors no longer need central approval to award it. And, that should cut bureaucracy.
True, but the bar is so high that many schools, particularly, and I'm speaking from personal experience here, particularly in disadvantaged contexts, they may never reach it. And for those that do, the pressure to maintain it can become absolutely overwhelming. What begins as a badge of pride may quickly become a source of stress for staff and communities. It really, really is a bit of a badge of worry, that top grade, because you are constantly worried. House prices go up around a school that has the old outstanding, etc. And then the pressure to maintain it is immense.
And of course, it's sometimes judgments change and there may be contextual reasons for why it has not been possible for schools to maintain that judgment. And that doesn't mean to say that anything may be, radically wrong. It just means that they're in a different context and they're having to adjust. I mean, I'm just thinking about, I know a head teacher who literally over the weekend, her school community changed dramatically because there was places available at her school and there was a group of families who were emergency housed and were going to be there for a while, none of which could speak any English. And so that head teacher suddenly had a whole influx of children and they were having to work out programs of support and get staff in place. And, it took a while to determine what kind of support the children needed, how school had to adapt to that. Yeah. And so I'm just saying, I think people always assume that when a judgment changes and to say a judgment below what they've been judged before, doesn't necessarily mean there's anything worrying about, how school functions. It may be that they're, for want of a better phrase, and I think everybody's saying it these days, school just may be on a bit of a different journey for a period of time.
Absolutely.
So, and also the one thing I would also say is that it may also be influenced by inspector training and competency in the actual application, something that plagued the previous system.
Yeah, definitely.
So Ofsted says every inspection will now include an extra inspector for one day to ease pressure and allow more dialogue with leaders.
And I think that's helpful in theory, but it doesn't really address the culture of high stakes accountability. One extra pair of hands won't change the anxiety schools feel when Ofsted is at the door, without a doubt.
I agree. I think it'll be very, very beneficial for the lead inspector.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced actually that's really going to impact on the actual process as schools see, feel and experience it.
Yeah, it feels like it's a mood for Ofsted inspectors rather than for schools.
Yeah. So inspections restart on the 10th of November 2025 with volunteer schools. Then routine inspections will restart from December. and early years providers, they will now be inspected every 4 years instead of 6.
Yeah, and that's a big shift, but the rollout feels rushed. Volunteers may feel like guinea pigs, and the earlier providers already face huge workload pressures. Shortening their inspection cycle, that could make those pressures worse.
If I'm just reflecting, and I know it's possibly my research background that's kicking in here, I actually don't see what they're going to gain from starting in November with inspections on volunteer schools and the routine inspections the following month.
Exactly.
That's
It's not like it's not being used for a learning exercise, is it, or for research?
No, or if anything's found to be problematic, that would require a massive amount of work to get the framework changed for the next month.
Yeah, so it sounds a bit like a soundbite.
Yeah.
Than a reality of actually making a difference.
Yeah, I can't see really can't see the logic in that at all. So yeah, not sure about that. Don't think that's been thought through. Ofsted is also introducing Explore an Area, replacing Area Insights. So parents can compare their school with similar schools, and that's a quote.
Oh yeah, similar schools. Yeah, absolutely. Potentially useful, but those comparisons are notoriously tricky. Done badly, they could create unhealthy competition and oversimplify unique local challenges, really. I've never liked that comparison of similar schools.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, what do similar schools mean? So is that schools in similar circumstances, similar situations, similar locations? And for me, that would be problematic because having headed up a special unit in this area, but also having been a governor, a safeguarding governor and chair of governors in a school in this area, the particular area I'm talking about, there were probably about 6 schools spaced out within the area, but in relatively quite close proximity. Now, the school where I was a governor was in the area where everybody came to Bradford and they were housed there if they arrived with absolutely nothing. They were on a much more difficult pathway. And what you tended to find was as families settled and their home life became settled, their work life became settled, they tended to move, and they would move sort of within the area. And so I just think that's one aspect, just example of contextualising something that might impact on a child's learning. So I think comparing the school where I was a governor to another school within that area, the similarities, I would question just how similar are they?
Well, I think it's a long-term used tool, similar schools, that's been around for a long time, and it's basically done at a data level. It's done centrally on a data analysis of a myriad of different data points, really, in terms of budget, in terms of size, in terms of intake. And it's something, sometimes you look at your similar schools and you think, that's really weird, I can't see the similarity. But that's been done for a long time.
But that wouldn't fit with safeguarding, for instance.
No, it doesn't. No,
I think that's very, very much focusing on attainment and possibly attendance, but it doesn't lend itself to, and I would argue, things like when you're examining, the quality of learning, it doesn't take into account the context of the actual process, the actual teaching process and the baseline of not just attainment levels, but the other contextual things it could be influencing. So I'm disappointed that they're still using that terminology, similar schools. And for me, that signals that they're not going to move away from that data-driven focus on attainment and related things. So, Sarah, what do we think? Genuine reform, or is it just a rebrand?
I think it's a bit of both. The new system has some positives, clearer language, more narrative, less red tape. But the high stakes culture remains, and the key issues like attendance risk being sidelines, that's a worry for me. And without real cultural shift, the reforms may not deliver the change that schools need.
I'd agree.
Heads are still going to be fearful. and you'll still be sitting there waiting for that call. It doesn't address all those issues, that came to light really through Ruth Parry. Yes, the safeguarding bit was addressed, but all that anxiety and that whole fear, I would have liked to have seen exceptional gone. I would have liked to seen that top category gone, because I don't think it's helpful for anybody.
Well, I'd agree with that. And also, the one thing I maybe possibly disagree is, I think on one hand, I think it's good that safeguarding is kept separate. It hasn't been, which there was a risk of
Yeah, I agree with you.
amalgamating that. However, I think the met and not met is distinctly unhelpful. And I think we've had quite the introduction of exacting standards for safeguarding, which has created really quite phenomenal improvement. And I'm talking about safeguarding in its widest context, not just child protection. And I would really hate to see the focus on that actually be diluted.
Yeah.
So that's the worry for me, that and the behaviour. I think that should also stand alone for me, in my opinion, I should say.
Yeah.
So I guess what we're saying is, we can see some progress, but I don't know if you feel the same, Sarah. I just feel it's a little bit unfinished.
Yeah, I agree. It's unfinished.
Yeah.
And for me, it feels just too much of just a rebrand of what we had.
Yeah. And also, I think the real test will be in how inspectors apply it in practice, not just what the framework says on paper. And I think I can guarantee we will still be talking about discrepancies in application, especially on that top grading, because you will get situations where one school will say, well, we think we're very, very similar, using their terminology, to this school, and yet that inspector thought that they were at this standard, but our inspector didn't. What's the difference between two us? I think that's going to be problematic for them. I still think there should have been some central control over that. So, yeah, we'll wait and see. No doubt, Sarah, we'll be back.
We'll be back.
Talking about
I'm
this.
going to have a conversation with my great friend who is an active Ofsted inspector on the QT and find out what her real thoughts are.
Yeah, and it'll be really interesting to actually examine the impact that this is having on those that are within the inspection process.
Yeah.
So more to come. So thanks for listening. If you're a teacher, leader or parent, we'd love to hear your views, whether you think that this is true reform or just a rebrand. So join the conversation, let us know, and see you next time.